We were the first victims. They're actually on our land.
What we've ended up with was a very large decision that essentially held that Aboriginal title can apply to private property.
I want to reassure you, there's no threat to your fee simple ownership of your place. There is no threat to ownership of land by settler culture British Columbians at all.
In the summer of 2025, the BC Supreme Court issued a landmark decision that undercut private property rights in British Columbia. This landmark decision potentially impacts over 2 million fee simple titles. In this decision, titled Cowichan Tribes versus Canada, the court ruled that the Cowichan First Nation holds Aboriginal title over land where their 19th century summer fishing village was located in modern-day Richmond, BC. The Aristotle Foundation has profiled how risky this decision is, how governments and courts have continually expanded the definition of Aboriginal title, and how all BC First Nations have received over $27 billion in the past few decades, which should count towards reconciliation. But the Cowichan decision is only the newest attack on private property rights. Consider two stories, one from BC and one from Ontario. In those provinces, something seemingly as benign as an archaeological regulation makes it nearly impossible to develop private property without massive costs for homeowners. Tens of thousands of properties are at risk in both provinces.
So here's how this works. The government requires private landowners to pay for archaeological digs on their land if they find proof of an archaeological site. The problem is that private landowners don't know where archaeological sites exist unless they start to work on the land, or unless they go and they ask the ministry whether or not their land has an archaeological site or a heritage site or what have you. So private property owners will start to build or want to be in the process of building and suddenly be set with a bill that could go up to as high as $500,000. In the winter of 2011, Gary and Fran Hackett, an elderly couple in Vancouver, British Columbia, decided that they wanted to build a 108-unit condo building on their land. In the process of developing their land, the Hacketts came across human remains that were presumed to be of Indigenous origin. Because of this, the Hacketts were forced to pay for an archaeological study by the government that cost them $500,000 out of their own pocket. The purpose of the study was to go in and study the land and make sure that all the human remains were removed, properly exhumed, and returned back to the Musqueam First Nation for proper ceremonial and burial rites. The government had said that they could do this, everything was fine. But the Musqueam First Nation didn't agree. They argued that the remains couldn't be moved from the land out of respect to the land and out of respect to the remains themselves, which ended up leading to protests across the city. Protests that were so intense that they even shut down the Arthur Lang Bridge. Politicians sided with the Musqueam First Nation, and unfortunately, in the end, the government told the Hacketts that they could no longer move the remains from their land, and their land was essentially frozen in time.
In 2020, I decided to investigate severing the front section of my property and building a retirement home. A smaller, more affordable home with making everything more accessible for myself and my wife. We've lived in our home for about 50 years in the township of North Dumfries in the region of Waterloo. As part of a condition of severance, after I'd put in an application to the township, I found out that the region of Waterloo was a commenting agency. And their request, one of them was an archaeological assessment amongst many, many others. So in the fall of 2020, the archaeological company that I hired, which I had to pick off of a list that the government gives you, started out with stage 1 and stage 2. So after stage 1 and stage 2 was completed, they informed me that they had found some items and that a stage 3 and a stage 4 would be required. So nearing the end of 2022, I finally got an estimate from the archaeological company for about $400,000 to do the assessment. I also found out that I would be required to pay the First Nations groups, 2 groups, to act as monitors during the process.
Look, we can all agree it's important to be sensitive when trying to uncover historical sites. You want to handle history, the deceased, and culture with care. But the question is any of this fair? A person's land isn't just land, it's an extension of themselves. It's a piece of property that they can build a home on, retire, save, and raise a family. And when a project is shut down, a community goes out of work, when a person's land is frozen, they lose the ability to build something that is going to be beautiful for themselves, and when they're forced to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on an archaeological dig, they not only lose out on the ability to make money and to retire in peace, but they're also forced to spend money out of pocket. And the question is, what is it all for? Well, in the case of the Hacketts, what it really means is watching as land that could have been made into something of value sits empty indefinitely. We have to ask ourselves the question, is there a better way for us to do this, or are we stuck with the status quo?
How is it so complicated when you're trying to build a new home, and an affordable one, and yet the levels of government are making it so difficult? In light of the fact we're supposed to be in a housing crisis, I just don't quite understand that philosophy. I just want my rights back as a Canadian.